Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay in the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
What is up, Knight fans? Welcome to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. I'm Jeff Sharon, along with Eric Lopez, and man, all of a sudden basketball falls away, and it's like all of a sudden there's not much going on here at UCF. All of a sudden, right? It's weird.
Yeah, it's always in a unique time of year.
We got baseball, we got softball, we got some news to talk about also that we've been dying to touch upon here on the podcast. And first of all, don't forget you can hit us up at blackandgoldbanneret.com. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at UCF_Banneret. You can follow me at Jeff_Sharon and follow Eric at Eric Lopez Elo. You can also hit us up on Facebook and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends. Leave us a rating on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, and TuneIn Radio, who we're proud to be a part of. And let's dive right in, Elo, because, the big news, we'll get to softball, we'll get to baseball, we'll get to a number of other things. Nothing really new on the Tacko Fall front, but I almost forgot. Guest today, great guest. Brandon Helwig joins us once again from UCFsports.com, and we get to riff a lot about football in the spring. Spring games coming up in a little bit more than a week. Also talk about what we're going to talk about here in a little bit, which is UCF has a new conference mate, Eric Lopez. Wichita State, the Shockers, have announced that they are going to leave the Missouri Valley Conference, and they are going to join the American as of July the 1st of this year. Obviously, we know how successful Wichita State has been in basketball, particularly on the men's side. They have been so. I went through the record, and really it was quite remarkable. Under Greg Marshall, their current head coach, they have won 25 games, at least 25 games, every year since 2009-2010. They've won 30 games 3 times. They've been to a Final Four. They've been to they've been to 2 Sweet 16s. They won the NIT back in 2011. Under Marshall, they've been great. He actually took over for Mark Turgeon, who had quite a bit of success at Wichita State. Wichita's been a very traditional basketball power, but they joined the American in all sports, which for them, I had it pulled up a second ago, but here it is. So for Wichita, obviously they have basketball. They have basketball, men's and women's. They have baseball and softball. They have cross-country. Cross-country and track for men's and women's. Of course, UCF has only track and cross-country for women, but they also have golf. Basically what they're doing is they're filling in the gap that's created by Navy, because Navy is a football-only member of the American. So if you kind of think about, like, there's School X over here, and it's Navy for football, and it's Wichita State for everything else. So, but they joined the conference. And, overwhelmingly positive reviews, positive for, Wichita State, obviously, moving up from the Missouri Valley, which I think you can say that is certainly a move up to the American from the Missouri Valley, and a win for the American in that they get another basketball school. We talked about this a few weeks ago, Eric, about how I thought that the American's been getting short shrift in terms of men's basketball. And I think Wichita State's going to sort of help to alleviate that. At least I certainly believe it will. What do you think on this?
I think it was a good move. Look, Wichita State has been tremendous under Greg Marshall. I understand some people are skeptical because, how much of the success is Greg Marshall? Basically alluding that if he leaves, wouldn't that be the end of Wichita State? Well, first of all, you could say that about a lot of programs. And Greg Marshall hasn't left to this point. I would argue that this is a sign that Greg Marshall's probably going to stay there. He's passed up on some jobs. He's making good money. People don't realize he's making over $3 million at Wichita State. That's a basketball school first. There is no football. And I think what some people don't understand is in college basketball, some coaches prefer to be at a school where there is no football because that means you're the guy. You're the program. You're the face of the university. You get all the revenue. You get all the money donated. There is something to be said for that. And I think Greg Marshall is comfortable at Wichita State. They've been to a Final Four, so it's not like they're not capable of doing that.
They were a 1 seed.
Where they've been a 1 seed and they got screwed because they got Kentucky in the second round because Kentucky got terribly underseeded. And I think, and Greg Marshall spoke to our friend Haley Alton at the American Digital Network there on their side in the American Conference. And he acknowledged, one of the reasons why they're doing this move is because in the Missouri Valley, the league has dropped and it's been in decrease where they haven't had an at-large team come out of the Missouri Valley other than Wichita State in recent years. And they were kind of capped out and they were getting punished. I think this past year was kind of the clincher. They had this great year. Ken Palm had them as a top 10 team in the country, but yet the committee seeded him very low. And they seeded him super low in part, I think, because of the Missouri Valley, and they were down. So I think from Wichita State standpoint, they join an American Conference, and if they're going to be the favorites to win the American Conference this upcoming year. And I think if they win the American Conference, they're going to get respected more in winning the high seed. So I don't see Greg Marshall leaving anytime soon. And I think also it tells you from the American Conference, it's a conference that's still out of Providence. And I think they've been very pleased with the success that it's had in football. In fact, maybe to some extent, maybe exceeded expectations. It has become the best football conference that's not a Power Five by far. And yet the basketball's been up and down. The first year of the American Conference, they had 4 teams. They could have had a 5th. SMU got left out. You had the magical run with UConn to win the national title with Shabazz Napier that year. But also, you had a year like this past year where you had 2 teams make the field, 2. And, with the television situation up in the air from the standpoint, you may not get more revenue out of television. One of the ways you can get revenue is by getting a lot of teams into the NCAA tournament and performing well. There was a story out recently that the ACC has made over $100 million based on in the last 3 years based on their team's performances in the NCAA tournament and how many teams they get into the NCAA tournament. So I think that there is concern about where the basketball conference is, especially with Connecticut having a down year. And there's always been whispers about whether Connecticut's happy in the American. Would they rather just be in the Big East in basketball, which, as you know, there's more their rivals are really all in the Big East. Like UConn really doesn't have a legitimate rivalry right now in the American when it comes to basketball. They're all in the Big East or in the ACC. So there's that issue that you're concerned with. And then you have programs like Memphis, which has in a steady decline. And there's questions with if it can come back up anytime soon. Temple's kind of a floater of a program. So, and then, SMU has been really good the last couple of years, but we'll see how they do in the post-Larry Brown era. So, I think there's some questions internally about the league, and I think they feel that Wichita State, with that brand and the respect they have gathered nationally from college basketball, fixes some of that concern.
Concerns also about, thinking back to the travel for the non-revenue sports. So your volleyballs and all that. First of all, actually, they won the Missouri Valley in volleyball last year, for example. They do have baseball and they have softball as well. Talking to some of the folks that I know, they're not all that concerned about the travel to Wichita because now Tulsa's a travel partner. Wichita's not a small town. It's a pretty sizable town in the state of Kansas. The question about, can you get commercial flights out of there? Okay, fine. But, it's not, you're not flying out to Hawaii. Okay. I mean, it's in the Midwest. I think everybody will be fine in that respect. I agree with you that it's a big win for basketball. Interesting that you say that you feel that they'll be a pretty instantaneous favorite
yes.
in men's. I know that they're that good, but you think that even with the step up in competition that they're the odds-on favorite in men's basketball?
I do, because I think they're a legitimate top 20, top 15, top 10 team. I think they're very good. And Greg Marshall, they'll be good. I'm not saying they're going to breeze through the league, okay? I'm not suggesting that. They're going to – but I do think they're better than Cincinnati. I do think they're better than SMU. I think those are the three teams on paper. And then you have UCF and Houston. If I had to make my top five going into the season, those are my top five teams. And I know some people, UCF fans, are like, well, does this hurt UCF? And, does it break their bubble? Maybe they had a chance to win the conference and all that. The way I look at it, and we don't need, if UCF can get one or two games with Wichita State, that's going to help their RPI, regardless. And that's the most important thing that I think people are missing about this. Yes, it's going to improve the conference's RPI. And if it improves the conference RPI, I actually think it increases the chances if UCF plays well to get in as an at-large. Whereas, look at this past year. UCF had no shot to get into the NCAA. They were not talked about because their RPI was in the 60s and this or that. And people were just dismissing it. Well, if you have at Wichita State, if you're playing a game against Wichita State this upcoming year, for example, instead of a game against, I don't know, an East Carolina, well, that's a big difference from an RPI. And for people that don't follow the RPI, you're actually better off playing a Wichita State game, even if it means a loss, than playing like the worst team in the league that's 150 or 200 in the RPI and getting a win. That's how wacky the system is. So I think it helps the league, and if it helps the league, it helps UCF. And yeah, you know what? UCF's got it's an extra challenge. But I think Johnny Dawkins and UCF, that's how you get into the NCAA team, is by playing the best teams. You're not going to backdoor into the NCAA tournament. So I think it's a positive from that standpoint, from a UCF standpoint in basketball, from a league standpoint. And, again, I think the American – and plus you're weakening the other conferences. That's a big blow for the Missouri Valley. Wichita State is the face of the Missouri Valley. They don't have that now in the Missouri Valley. And I think the Missouri Valley is in danger of being probably now an automatic one-bid league. Yeah. And who knows what the future holds for the other leagues. So I think, Mike Oresco has said it. He wants to be a Power 6 league. Well, you look in the basketball setup, you have obviously the Power 5 conferences, ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, Pac-12. The difference is in basketball, you have the Big East. And the Big East has done very well for themselves. So, that's what the Americans competing against. And they want to kind of make up some ground there. And I think they feel they have with Wichita State, especially with some of the questions internally that they have.
Interestingly enough, I think one of the sports that you really have to also look out for with Wichita State, baseball. They have a very good baseball tradition out there. Probably the most famous Wichita State shocker there ever in baseball. Joe Carter actually went there for 3 years and then came out after his junior year. But, a couple other interesting names. Darren Dreifert was a longtime pitcher in the majors. Braden Looper went to Wichita State. Casey Blake went there. Looking down the line, Eric Wedge went there, who's a manager now.
Great tradition. Now,
pitcher, yeah, they're pretty good on that respect.
Now, they're great tradition. Now, there is, Wichita State hasn't been what they were under Gene Stevenson, back in the glory days when they won the national title in 1989 and they were going to Omaha pretty frequently, actually. They made it to a super regional recently when Connor Gillespie was their best player, but they haven't been the Wichita State program that they've been in the past. So there is a question, can they get back to that or not? They have a very nice stadium, but it is a traditional program that's very familiar in college baseball. They haven't really been that program. It's kind of interesting, college, but still it's not, they're certainly capable, hopefully, to bounce back in that. I think the other big winner, everybody's focused on men's basketball, and I get it. It's obviously popular and everything, so I get it. I think the other big winner, and I think you've probably been told the same thing, I think the other sport that's going to get the big boost from this is volleyball.
Yeah.
Wichita State's very good in volleyball. I think they've been a Sweet 16 team in the NCAA tournament in volleyball. They've been a powerhouse in the Missouri Valley. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a big boost in an American conference that's starting to get some respect finally in volleyball. When you and I have seen it, this past year was the first time that the American Conference finally had multiple bids in the league with Cincinnati and SMU. You had UCF and Temple kind of knocking on the door. So now you add a Wichita State that should help their RPI. And, now I think the American Conference in volleyball should be a consistent multiple bid league every year with this addition. That's a big addition for them, and getting Wichita State. It also weakens the Missouri Valley. Again, that's going to be a common theme here. And you mentioned it. In other sports that people don't talk about, like volleyball, a lot of times you had to go up to Tulsa and there was no travel partner.
Right.
So either, and women's basketball to some extent had this issue. So either you would have to come all the way back home, or you had to go to like SMU or something like that to make up for it. Now, from a scheduling standpoint, you could go to a Tulsa and then go to Wichita State, or vice versa, and a much more decent type of that standpoint. So I think that'll help the volleyball. I think volleyball is the second big winner in this one as we break down the other sports. I think baseball remains to be seen. If Wichita State can come back to what they were, then that's a boost for the league. But, you've covered the baseball conference. I mean, the conference is loaded as it is. I mean, it's very good right now, actually. I think it's surprised the league how good it is. And I think softball now, the interesting thing with softball, Wichita State won the Missouri Valley last year, and they're currently in the 60s in RPI. In fact, they've beaten Tulsa this year, and that's a rivalry, by the way. Tulsa and Wichita State, they play every year in softball. They play in midweek. I'm sure they play in other sports, so they're close by. In fact, I think that's going to be a natural rival for Tulsa now. Don't you think, Jeff? I mean, I think that's going to which I don't think people I think that's kind of been dismissed. I think people dismiss that kind of stuff, but I do think it's important for the American Conference to develop rivalries. Certainly UCF and USF's done that with the trophy and all the sports they do, but you look across the board, who are the other rivalry games? And I think Tulsa, Wichita State, that's going to help Tulsa, and that's going to help Wichita State. So I think that's a plus. But for softball, now they go to 8 teams in the league. A Wichita State team that's an up-and-coming softball program. It's in the 60s RPI as we recorded this podcast. They're the favorites to win the Missouri Valley again this year, so they're probably going to be in the NCAA tournament. I personally think the way they're going, I think they're a top 4, top 5 team in softball. And, again, that helps the softball league. Again, boost its RPI and again, make it a multiple bid league. So I know it's under the radar because all the focus is on men's basketball. And Mike Oresco mentioned in his teleconference, the Wichita State team just made the NIT in women's basketball recently, so they're not bad in women's basketball. So I actually think Wichita State helps the league across the board more than I think some of the outsiders think.
I agree with you on that. And by the way, you mentioned volleyball. How good they've been. They've won the Missouri Valley 3 of the last 4 years, including last season, 24-8 last year in volleyball. A couple of additional notes on Wichita State in particular. They gave up football. They did have football back in the day, but they gave it up in 1986. And also and this is worth looking at, their branding. You guys probably remember this from when they were making the Final Four, when they were a 1 seed, but their mascot is sort of a bundle of wheat dressed in a sweater with eyes and a mouth and a nose. His name is Wooshok. For some reason, all this time I thought his name was Jack Straw. But by the way, if anyone gets that reference, please let me know. So, any dice?
No die. I'm leaving you hang. I'm going to leave you hang.
Oh my god! All right, someone has to let me know that they got that reference immediately. Anyway, all right. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk with Brandon Helwig. We're going to have him on to talk a little spring football. We're a little bit more than a week away from the spring game. Check in, see how UCF football is doing in spring number 2 under Scott Frost. We'll talk a little bit more Wichita State joining the American from Brandon's point of view, and a couple other things as well when we return. Stick around. The Black and Gold Banneret Podcast is back after this.
Hello, Night Nation. I'm Andrew Fegley.
And I'm Trey Strelko. Where are we? This isn't our usual spot.
It looks like we've landed in the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of those guys.
You know, Nightline has UCF sports covered.
Week in and week out, we bring you interviews with newsmakers and in-depth analysis of UCF sports.
Subscribe to our weekly podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Be sure to subscribe to Nightline on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at UCF_Nightline.
Trace, can we go back to the 1148 studios now and start working on our next all-new Nightline?
How do we get out of here? Go Knights!
Charge on.
Now back to you guys in the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.
Welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Jeff Sharon, Eric Lopez with you, and joining us here in just a moment will be our guest, Brandon Helwig. We had him on earlier this year to talk about the UCF on National Signing Day and football recruiting and all that, and now we wanted to get him on here to talk a little bit about spring football and also talk about Wichita State joining the American from the UCF perspective. Of course, Brandon, you can check out everything that he does at UCFsports.com, which we are proud members of. And also you can hit him up on Twitter at UCF Sports as well. So no one is more plugged into UCF than Brandon. And here it is, our interview from earlier with Brandon Helwig of UCFsports.com. Hey, Brandon, what's going on?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Good, man. Thanks for joining us on the show. I know we had you on before. We were talking about the recruiting and National Signing Day and all that other stuff that I can't stand. And and now we're going to have you on to talk about another thing that, well, I don't quite not stand, but it's I think also gets overblown. That is spring football, and not so much that obviously we all understand the value of it and trying to get players ready and all that kind of stuff and installing new things and but UCF's practices are closed now, so all anyone can do, and I know that you do this every day. You're waiting out there, waiting for the guys to come back and whoever gets to talk. So, based on what you have heard, how's the spring going for UCF football?
Well, as you kind of alluded to, we wait outside and wait for practice to end, and we kind of choose who we talk to every day. Talk to Coach Frost maybe once or twice a week, and just gleaning from what they're telling us. It seems like it's going well. I mean, I wouldn't expect anyone to say anything different.
Yes,
I don't think any coach
could you imagine
is
someone coming up to you and
say,
say, "Yeah"? Can you imagine someone coming up to you saying, "Man, that practice was awful, and we should fold the football team right now"?
Yeah, but that said, you can kind of pick up on the body language and the verbal cues from some of these guys, and especially on offense, where an area that frankly really struggled, especially towards the end of last season. They had a scrimmage this past Wednesday, and and hearing what Frost had to say and all the different players that we talked to, Frost flat out said that was the best day of spring that the offense has had, maybe the best day period since they've been there. I mean, we weren't able to see it. I mean, it's kind of hard to kind of relay, how things went, but from what, kind of Frost said and what some of the other people said is, the offense kind of shows an attitude now, a kind of a toughness and maybe a swag about them that, last year they didn't have. They're learning the system, and everything else. And, I think the UCF defense kind of had that last year. They got things together and rolling earlier. They kind of had a different toughness and an attitude out on the field. The offense lacked that. But, Coach Frost said that was really starting to show, especially on Wednesday. It was kind of funny because he brought it up. It's one thing when we talk about, going to practice for years, you always see, it happens in football, little fights, maybe fights too strong of a word, but, it gets pretty competitive. Scuffles, skirmishes, things like that. You get a push and a shove. Both guys are wearing a helmet just they throw a punch. I mean, it's not like anyone's getting seriously injured, stuff like that. You see it. You're used to seeing it when you go to a lot of practices and Frost, brought it up, which to me was kind of surprising because there's TV cameras and people that don't go to practices may take that the wrong way. Yeah. Like, oh, they're getting in fights, chemistry must be bad. But he kind of mentioned that as a positive. The offense is literally fighting back and showing an attitude. And it seemed like it starts with the offensive line. And that's something that these guys really didn't have last year. But no, and like I said before, we don't know, but from what they say, offensive line's a lot better. They're blocking a lot better than they did last year. So, maybe we'll see a little in the spring game to see if that's true. But honestly, we won't really know till the season gets here.
No, you're right about that. I know a lot of people are focused on the offense, but I'm intrigued more on the defensive side of the ball, which carried this team last year, lost a lot of personnel to young defense. I talked to actually recently one of the players on that defensive side of the ball, and they're telling me that some of the young guys are really stepping into the system quickly and really going to contribute. A lot of young guys. There's the kid Collier, I believe, is an early enrollee. I've heard good things about him from a player. What have you heard from the defensive side of the ball as far as some of the youngsters there? They're going to have to step in.
Yeah, again, we don't know if it's coach speak or player speak
right.
or whatever you want to call it. But some guys will come out and admit and say, they were a little bit, concerned, about the defense going into this spring, seeing the losses that they had. If you look at the back seven of the secondary and linebackers, that would be 7 out of the. That's everybody. 2 graduating, 3 linebackers, and 4 players. I'm doing the mathematics. I think we got 7 players graduated. Right. That's pretty much everybody except for Shaquem Griffin. Right. And pretty much everyone graduated. That's a lot of experience to replace. And I think it's 7 of the top 8 or 7 of the top 9 leading tacklers from last season. But there are players who have been waiting in the wings that do have some experience. You've got Trey Neal and Kyle Gibson playing safety. And what Frost said the other day, those guys kind of look, that position is probably more solid than the other ones with, starting safety with Neal and Gibson. It's the other spots are still kind of up for grabs. I know, Eric, you just mentioned Antoine Collier, who was one of the 3 true freshmen that are on in January. He's one of the guys in the mix. Really, the best corner, frankly, is Neville Clark. And he would, in any scenario, he'd say, you can bank on him. You can pencil him right now as a number 1. The problem is if you guys remember the report that came out a few weeks ago, he's one of the players, the other one being wide receiver Tristan Payton, that has to miss the first 6 games of the season due to an NCAA suspension for failing a drug test before the Cure Bowl. So you have a guy that is a starter and is the best corner and the most experienced. Right from what we could see, we did get able to see a little bit of the Wednesday the pre-practice. We were allowed for 30 minutes before the scrimmage started, but they were kind of doing some things on the field as we were leaving. He was still the number 1 corner, so that's kind of tough. It's like, what do? He's a guy that won't be available for the first half of the season, but he's going to be there eventually. So, you can kind of erase, take pencil. Remember, you can erase that. So you're going to have someone like an Antoine Collier. You got a guy like Brandon Moore. Local kid from Seminole High School, redshirted last year. He's definitely in the mix there. And a new name that, a lot of guys are mentioning that seems to be having a really nice spring. Another guy who redshirted named Richie Grant. He was playing safety at the beginning of spring. And I think, because maybe the 2 starting safeties a little bit more solid right now, they decided to move him to corner to see if he could compete for one of those spots there. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of pans out, going into this season. And linebacker, it's Shaquem Griffin, and you could say he brings back a lot of experience. And he does in the aspect that he played. And he was the American Defensive Player of the Year, an outstanding season, but that was really his only season that he's ever played, So he's still in a lot of ways kind of learning the position and trying to hone his craft. And speaking of Shaquem, he looks completely different. If you put him and his brother Shaquille side by side, 2-3 years ago, they look like the same type of player. They have the same body type. Both, one was playing corner, one was playing safety. But if you put them side by side now, they don't even look like twins. In the face they look like twins. But Shaquem, last season, he said, we talked to him the other day. He said this past season he played at 202 pounds. Right now he's at 227.
Whoa!
And his brother Shaquille is at something like 194. I think was his weight at the NFL Combine recently. So he looks like a linebacker, maybe he didn't quite look like he looked more like a safety corner type player this past year. He looks like a linebacker. So if anyone sees him, when they got the pads on and stuff, it's always hard to tell. But if you see him without the pads, there is a noticeable difference between Shaquem this spring and last season.
So, last year at this time, everyone was, and I think you touched upon this a little bit, we talked about the learning curve, right? Last year at this time, everyone was still peeling open the new playbook under Scott Frost and his and both his offensive and defensive staffs and trying to figure out, okay, how do we run this new system? It's been 12 years since UCF has been in this situation where, this is, everyone now knows the system. And so now you can work on the fine tuning of things. How are the players, from what you can tell, do they have, that much less of a burden on them in terms of, now they know what they have to do. Now it's just a matter of, working on their reaction and things like that. And then how do the coaches feel about, is it easier for them to coach the players and they're not having to go back and rehash the basics?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk to the player, of course, they weren't going to admit it last year, but when you talk to the Juwan Hamiltons of the world, offensive coordinator Troy Walters, all kind of say it now that, it's a lot easier now that they actually know what they're doing. I mean, Juwan Hamilton kind of laughed, and he says last year he had no idea what he was doing, really. I mean, he had to be reminded in the huddle of different plays, and, he really didn't know what was going on, and says, and even, I can't remember, it might have been Trey Neal, but it was a player on defense, I think, said this in the early spring. It kind of said something, how they came up with the little nicknames for the offensive defense, UCF fast for the offense, UCF fierce for the defense. It really wasn't UCF fast for the offense last year. I mean, that's where they want the offense to get to, is running at a high tempo, getting a lot of plays off. One of the players on defense said, you know what, it actually feels like UCF fast this spring because they're making the defense tired with how quickly they were able to go. And that was something they really couldn't operate at that kind of pace last year, not when, pretty much the entire offense was still learning what they were doing out there. But, I'll be curious to see how they kind of conduct this spring game. Of course, I'm sure they're going to, they don't want to show too much. I mean, coaching, that's the reason practices are closed. It's out of coaching paranoia and prying eyes and whatnot. But I'll be curious to see what kind of tempo they go at. And I am encouraged by a statement that Frost made the other day. He said, I asked them, if they knew what kind of format they were going to. And I think the average fan might think, spring game, I want it to be like a game, with two separate teams and kind of see them square off. But that's really counterproductive to what you want to do in building a team. What it sounds like Frost said they're going to do is they're going to leave the number one offense, number one defense, number two offense, and so on. They're going to keep those units distinct and just have them face off. Like it'll be the one. I mean, you're going to get a false sense of maybe the offense is better. If they don't go against the number one defense, but it'll be like one offense versus two defense and so on. Yeah. But just to kind of keep those guys, together. You don't want to split up offensive linemen that, the five guys have been lined up next to each other all spring. And then all of a sudden you're moving a guy in and out. You have, different running backs, different receivers and whatnot from the rotations they've been playing. You don't really want to do that. It's kind of like a wasted day if you only allowed, the spring game's your 15th practice. So it sounds like they're going to do that. So knowing that they're going to do that, it'll be interesting to see what kind of tempo they go at next week for the spring game.
Brandon, in your years going to the spring game, are you more interested in seeing certain returning players, seeing how they look at it, or are you more interested in seeing the new faces? What's kind of your philosophy when you go to the spring game?
It's kind of different because if you would ask me this a couple of years ago, I'm like, not that I don't care, but the spring game to me was the most meaningless day out of 15 days of spring practice. If you go every day, okay. Yeah, now, if that's the only thing you're going to go to, you're going to, overanalyze everything. But, when Coach O'Leary was here and every practice was open, and I'd be there, you kind of just, kind of look back at the entirety of the spring and you don't make a big deal out of one specific day, and you kind of have that context when you feel like the team when you see them practice. That's kind of what we're lacking as media in this regime under Frost. You don't really feel like you have a good handle of the team and what the players can do. It's kind of hard to get a feel for how coaches interact with players and things like that you kind of took for granted in some years. So if you asked me a couple of years ago, the spring game, it's like, whatever, whatever happens. I just hope it's not too hot out there.
Right.
Hope no one gets hurt. And that was kind of my attitude. But yeah, and we're going to overanalyze everything. And, maybe offense will have a great day, defense, whatever happens is kind of what everyone's going to remember about this spring. And it may not be indicative of what happened in the other 14 practices. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I'll just kind of know in the back of my head, you really can't read too much into seeing one day and knowing that, they're really going to, try to be as vanilla as possible. Because I said, coaches by nature are incredibly paranoid and they don't want to do anything they feel is going to give anything away. I mean, they're probably thinking, representatives from the opponents are going to be in the stands or something. I don't know what they think, but knowing that we won't see the full offense or defense.
Switching gears to something that I think is actually really interesting, and I was curious to know about what you think about this. So Wichita State joining the American Athletic Conference beginning July the 1st of this year. We know how good that their basketball program has been. Of course, they were one seed in the NCAA tournament not all that long ago. They joined the American as a non-football playing member coming over from the Missouri Valley Conference. Initial reviews of Wichita State joining the conference seem to be overwhelmingly positive, especially from a basketball perspective. They gave up football back in 1986. But what do you think about this? What do they we know how good they are in basketball, but what else do they add to the American that makes this worthwhile for the conference and for UCF in particular, in your opinion?
Yeah, not that I'm like against the move. I don't know if I really have strong feelings either way. When I look at Wichita and where they're located, yes, you could say they're within the American footprint, not too far from Tulsa, but this is a spread out league, and just knowing, what some of these sports teams have gone through from a travel, basis, particularly I'm talking about men's basketball when you're flying out, you don't have charters like, a lot of these teams in the conference do. And, like they had a situation where they played a game at Tulsa, I think like on a Saturday afternoon or something, they had like a 1:00 game. And because Tulsa is a city with really limited air service, at least, when you compare it to the Houstons and Dallases of the world, they couldn't get a flight out. They had to play a game at 1:00. Their game, they were out of the arena by 4, and they had to, stay that whole night and then wait till the next morning to leave. And so you kind of, the team has to go through experiences like that. Unfortunately, for the most part, they it didn't seem to really hurt them this year, but those things can catch up to a team trying to compete for an NCAA tournament. That's not exactly related to the Wichita. You just hope that, UCF Athletics is in a better position to charter flights this upcoming season when, who knows what the schedule is going to be like. That's to be determined. Who UCF plays twice, who they play, only at home, only on the road. Maybe UCF won't even play at Wichita. I imagine out of the two, you'll probably at least have a game at Tulsa, between Tulsa and Wichita. So knowing that, I just kind of wondered, does this help UCF? Now that, mainly looking from a men's basketball standpoint, this is going to be the highest expectations of any UCF basketball season in history, where, every team every year, what are the goals? We want to make the NCAA tournament. It's always what a team's going to say. But this is a year where, if Tacko comes back, you feel that's a realistic opportunity to do that. And, Wichita, in theory, should strengthen the league and help RPIs and all that. But then you kind of wonder, well, is it a situation where if UCF was a, third or fourth best team in the league, are they just going to get bumped because all of a sudden, Wichita is in there and obviously will be the preseason, not only a top 10 team, obviously preseason team to win the conference. So, yeah, I don't know. And I just kind of wonder how much their success is tied to Greg Marshall. I mean, I know things are going well now, but, if he were to leave in the next couple of years, was it really worth adding a team out in the middle of Kansas, with the travel and, baseball is going to have to make that trip, softball. I don't know. But from what I understand, it can't hurt right now. They're not going to bring any more immediate money to the conference outside of potential NCAA tournament credits they could pick up. But, we'll see how it goes. It'll be fun. It'll be another, game you're going to circle on the schedule next year. But, yeah, I don't know if I'm really excited. And not that I'm against it, but I wouldn't say I'm really excited about it either.
Yeah, I mean, they do provide Tulsa with a travel partner out there, and a couple of the folks I talked to said, the travel that they said, the travel's kind of a breeze. It's not going to be that much of a problem. You're just driving along, flat expanses. I mean, and the other thing that I thought that was interesting is they kind of fill a hole. They fill the non-football hole that Navy provides. Navy's in the American for football only, and Wichita basically comes in and fills the holes out of the rest of that. Now, I thought that, from a basketball perspective, Eric and I talked about this before, is that I thought that I always think that the American gets short shrift when it comes to the men's basketball program especially come tournament selection time. Even though I don't think it should, I think it's a better basketball league than I think most other people do nationally, and I think it's getting better. Do you think that that this provides enough legitimacy, or is it because I was also concerned about what you just mentioned, that Greg Marshall, he's around for let's say he decides to move somewhere else. We know how fleeting athletic success can be, particularly even a team that as good as Wichita State is. I mean, look at George Mason when Jim Larinaga was there. And then all of a sudden he leaves and goes down to Miami, and George Mason's George Mason again. So, I mean, I don't know. Is it? Do you think that this does help out the conference profile when it comes to tournament time, or maybe not?
I mean, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, I just like you kind of mentioned before, if you go back and look at and I'm not trying to diss Wichita State at all. They built a fantastic program. Obviously, they get great fan support in their arena. But if you look at their basketball success, it is largely tied to Greg Marshall.
Right.
It's basically, really all of their NCAA tournament appearances, or the vast majority, have come in the 10 or so, or less than that, since he's been in Wichita. So you're kind of concerned from that standpoint, and kind of breaking up the continuity of, I know Navy's a special case being football only, but bringing in a school that doesn't play football, which to me, you kind of wonder, well, if you're kind of dipping your toe in the water a little bit with Wichita, why don't you go all out and maybe go after a Dayton or a Virginia Commonwealth, VCU, and kind of go to 14. You're not going to play football, but that'll make a very compelling basketball conference. If you're not going to, match up head to head with the ACC, but in some ways it's that model where you got a lot of schools. A lot of traditional basketball schools. You see what the ACC was able to do this past year in getting teams in. If you were to kind of go the extra mile and add those kind of teams, perennial NCAA tournament teams, as the American go, from a league that did get in 4 this past year, only got in 2 teams. Would that maybe get you to a situation where you're maybe getting into 6 teams a year? In a really good year, could you get 7? If you had a 14-team league. I don't know. That's something I don't think they're going to worry about right now. I mean, there's a lot of other considerations. There's a TV contract they're going to have to negotiate.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Next couple of years. I don't know if there's any more money. The landscape could completely change, even, as we stand right now with, the online, the Netflixes and the Amazons of the world kind of getting in the mix. Maybe Turner could be a player on the television side. There's a lot kind of remains to be seen. So that'll be the biggest consideration here is kind of structuring the American, on that television side when they negotiate again with ESPN. And I know that's a discussion for another day, but I kind of wonder, if you've already gone on the Wichita route, maybe, now that you've done it, maybe you should, consider, going to it a little bit more with Dayton and Virginia Commonwealth.
Well, Brandon, and I kind of agree with you. That's why I don't necessarily think, not necessarily saying that they would do that maybe in a year or two, but, it's been talked about well in depth about the future of college athletics as a whole. And Mike Oresco, and we've both heard him talk and talk about the Power Six. And one of the ways you can become a Power Six is if you weaken some of the, your competitors. I mean, by taking Wichita State, they weaken the Missouri Valley. If you take a Dayton and a VCU, you're weakening the A-10, for example. And I think and let's be honest, their offices are still in Providence, and there's still some of that Big East feel. I think everybody maybe deep down internally, maybe they're a little surprised how good the football has been. And I think they're they thought the basketball would be at a higher level than it's been. So I think that's part of the reaction with Wichita State is they definitely believe they want it to be a powerhouse basketball league in the country.
And maybe, if I'm the American, I don't want to say I'm concerned, but you kind of look at some of these teams. UConn had their first losing season and forever this year. That's kind of the concern. I know they had some injuries and whatnot, but there's some that's pretty much your flagship team in basketball. So
right.
You're kind of worried there. You see Memphis is really imploding. And what's going to be the second season coming up under Tubby Smith with players leaving left and right. The
Memphis
Lawson
is
brothers,
becoming a football school.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they really are. And so they're not really going to be expected to be competitive. I wonder even this coming season. And
Sure.
Temple's always been there, but they really kind of took a step back this year, and SMU, they really came out of nowhere, to be thought of, when they hired Larry Brown a few years ago, to kind of be thought of as a good basketball school. I mean, it was, when UCF played them in the early Conference USA days, I mean, they weren't even putting 1,000 people in that gym. They redid everything. Larry Brown got them going with some of the recruits with, in the Larry Brown way, and that Larry Brown way eventually got him on a postseason ban last year. Now he's gone, and I know they have an excellent coach in waiting that took over, but you kind of wonder, can this be sustained? So, some of the basketball powers that, you thought you had when the American kind of, rose from the Big East ashes a few years ago, you kind of wonder where that's headed. So then again, maybe that Wichita State, it's kind of insurance now. You have a team that, in the short term is going to be very good. That makes up for a Memphis that's going to be down. And, maybe you start to think, you see how the Wichita move goes. And as you start thinking about when you start to negotiate that next contract now, basketball, as everyone knows, doesn't really add the big money to TV contracts just based on rating. It's always concentrated on football. But, maybe you could do it in a way where, it really can't hurt to add a few more teams there because, I don't know. I think if you ask me if they had to expand, I mean, I would prefer to see a basketball power versus diluting the football side and just have too many teams that you never play. Obviously in a 12-team league, you're not going to play everyone every year anyway. But, I don't like the 14, plus, teams in a league where you only playing the team in the other division like every some odd year and all that stuff like the ACC and what was it like Wake Forest and North Carolina? They were never going to play each other, so they were talking about playing each other in a non-conference game or something crazy like that. I wouldn't want to see that. I know there's not a lot of history and tradition obviously between these teams, but I really don't want to see a 14-team football league. But maybe I wouldn't mind seeing those additions come on the other sports side.
All right, Brandon, what else are you working on that we can promote, that we can help promote for you?
Well, I mean, spring football's in full swing. I was busy today, kind of wrapping up, working on some interviews I've done the past few days. So that'll be going obviously for the next week. And basketball will be interesting to see what kind of happens here with Tacko and the NBA draft and what UCF does. They do have a scholarship to kind of, play around with.
What's your gut feeling on that? What's your gut feeling? Do you think he comes back, or are you concerned that he might play?
I think he comes back. I think this will be a great opportunity for him to kind of understand the process, for teams to become familiar with him, and he'll kind of learn on some things he needs to work on. But to me, if you're not pretty much guaranteed to be, in my eyes, a top 20 pick, I don't see how, and I don't know if he's going to, hear what he's going to hear, but if you don't feel like you're top 20, I don't think it's too big of a risk, to not be drafted or get drafted late in the second round and nothing's guaranteed. I think it's a huge risk. And if he doesn't hear he's top 20, he should come back, which I think is what's going to happen.
Boy, from your lips to God's ears, huh? Because it's, you're right. I mean, we both have talked about this before. I think he still does have a lot to work on, particularly on offense. But it'll be fun. Hopefully, we'll find out sooner rather than later. Brandon, where can folks reach out to you? UCFsports.com is the name of the site. UCF Sports is where I can be found on social media, Twitter and whatnot. Yeah. Cool. And we are proud members of UCFsports.com too, Brandon. So thanks for taking time for us. We appreciate it, man. And we'll see you probably at the spring game.
All right, guys. I'll see you later.
And our thanks again to Brandon for joining us on the podcast once again. So it's actually a pretty busy time of year for him as we head down the stretch here. So, I can't tell you how much I hope he's right about Tacko Fall sticking around. Don't you?
Yeah, and I tend to agree with him. It's funny because Chad Ford has come out with his, kind of his draft board, the ESPN NBA draft analyst. And he's got, he finally mentioned Tacko. He didn't even mention Tacko at all, remotely at all, in the first round. He called him, and I'm paraphrasing what he said. He was kind of an intriguing second round pick prospect, which is what he is. And I think that's the best case scenario he's going to get. Probably going to be told that. And my thing is, I think if you're Tacko, you can come back for another year and improve on that. So yeah. I'm still maintaining it. that he won't return. But I also understand, and I think you understand this too, Jeff. A lot of times, if a lot of people are involved in the decision making, and it depends on what they, you tell people and what you want to hear and what you want to know. So you never know. So, but I would be surprised, but I think he'll come back as well.
It's like I said, if he does decide to go, I'll never begrudge a guy for deciding, I'm going to try and, I'm going to take my shot right now and see what I can do. And even if it's a second round pick, that's still generational money that he could work himself into. I do hope he comes back. I think one of the advantages that UCF has is the fact that Johnny Dawkins is their head coach and former NBA guy. I think if it was someone else who didn't have that legitimacy with the next league, I think the situation might be entirely different. But Johnny wouldn't steer him wrong. And he comes back for one more year. He's getting coached by an NBA experienced coach. So I think that works perfectly fine as far as UCF is concerned. All right, we're going to dance delicately now around a couple of other sports here. Let's talk a little UCF baseball right now. The Knights are in a bit of a slide heading into this weekend series with East Carolina. Knights at 24-11, and looking at the schedule, goodness me, Eric Lopez, they've lost 4 in a row. Coming off of that, after they won that game against Stetson, they got swept by USF. And then lost to Florida Atlantic. Our buddy Brian Murphy's got a little column up on blackandgoldbanneret.com, which you definitely want to check out, sort of post-FAU, kind of where the team is right now, kind of in a little bit of a danger zone heading into the series against East Carolina. Eric, what did you see has been going wrong with this team so far?
Well, look, it's a tough stretch. USF's very good.
They lost 3 close games to USF. 1 run, and 2 runs.
And, FAU is very good, too. You're going to face some good teams. And, look, this is still a roster from last year that didn't make the NCAA tournament. To suggest that everything was going to go smoothly, I think, was just kind of naive. So, they've hit some hiccups. Certainly. They've left some runners on base. Their bullpen got used a lot in that USF series. I think hurt them a little bit. And, it's a learning deal. So we'll see what they do now. They'll lose FAU, but now you got to go to conference to East Carolina against the East Carolina team that was the preseason favorite going into the season, a team that made the Super Regionals last year with head coach Cliff Godwin, and they're off to a slow start, a stunning slow start, 0-6. So in the league, so going into the series, so that's going to be the challenge. And I know people are concerned, and here we go again, another slide. And look, it's definitely, it's concerning and certainly understandable, but, this has been a weird year, and college baseball, Jeff, is so, ever since they've kind of lowered the bats, it's so much more of an even playing field that nobody really separates themselves anymore. I was reading the other day about Florida State's a bubble team for the NCAA tournament because they've hit the skids in the ACC, and Miami's in danger of missing the NCAA tournament.
No one would have thought that when we played them against Florida State, man. They look like world beaters against us. Holy Moses.
Right. But what I'm saying is the room for error is not that much in college baseball. So to expect the team to go through a year and do, you're going to have some bumps, and everybody can beat anybody in a given day. And I think that's what it is. So especially in the American Conference, especially on the road. So I think you kind of have – I still think this has been there's a lot more positives than negatives. And we just got to see how it plays out. But it's certainly – you just as sports fans, I think we always – unfortunately, sometimes you treat the other sports like you do in football, where you kind of have the highs and lows from a week-to-week basis. But in baseball, you really can't do that.
Right.
And I think that's sometimes where you get yourself in trouble. Oh, they lost a weekend series. They're swept. They're done. Oh, we're in trouble. Oh, we lost 5 in a row. Well,
season's over.
Right. I think that's common a lot. And I've seen that too in softball, in fairness. I've started to see that from some of the fans and a lot of new fans that we have in softball, which we'll get into. It's just you can't treat baseball like you do football, where it's a do or die every week and it's a 1 week season. It just man, baseball, there's just 56 games plus conference tournament. You're going to have your peaks and valleys. And I get it. That people are people don't trust the program because of what's happened the last 4 years and how they've gotten to good starts and they faded. And I get it. What I would say is, based on what I've seen with the job that Greg Lovelady and his staff has done, considering these are not his players, and I don't think they're very talented. So I actually think they're in a good spot still, and let's see what happens. You got to let it play out. And remember, and you know this, you were at the conference tournament last year. This league, top to bottom, everybody can beat everybody. It really is. It really is. I don't think there's a dominant team in the league per se, but at the same time, this is a tough league. I mean, it's a tough league.
Coming into the weekend, UConn's in first place in the American at 6-0, and they're 19-11 overall. Then you got Houston and Tulane at 4-2, USF at 4-3, Cincinnati 3-4, UCF 2-4 in the league, and UCF at 24-11 overall. Memphis is behind them; they're 2-4 in the league. Well, actually tied, but they're 20-13. They've won 20 games. East Carolina's 0-6 in the league. They're about to win 20 games. So, everyone, the only team that's kind of middling right now, overall, in terms of overall records, are Cincinnati, who's won 3 in a row, and they're 17-16 overall. And then Tulane is actually 3 games under 500 overall. Everybody else is hovering around 20 wins. And, this is going to be a tough – this is about as tight as I've ever seen it in the baseball of the American.
And I think it's going to be like that all year. And I know fans don't want to hear this, and I get it. It's a rivalry, and let's give Mark Kingston some credit at USF.
28-6, man.
They're legit. They're a good team. I taught. When I was up there in Tampa last year, I was there last season when both softball and baseball played there. They had a lot of injuries at USF, and they've got them mostly healthy. That's a good team, and Mark Kingston's a heck of a head coach. He was an assistant at Miami, a head coach at Illinois State. He's going to win at USF. I know UCF fans don't want to hear that, but he's going to win. And Greg Lovelady's going to win too. I think that I'll tell you what, that was I know the result was not the way UCF liked it. Let me just I get it. But if you watch those games, if you follow, those are exciting. There was exciting games. It came down to the last at bat, and USF was fortunate. They won all 3 games, but give them credit. They held serve, they swept, they made enough, a play or 2 more in each game, but they're a good team. It's not like USF's a joke there. I get it's a rivalry, so it gets the results get emphasized and maybe highlighted more, especially with this trophy. So you lose 3 points or whatever in that scenario, but Kingston's got a good team there too. So let's not. It's not like UCF lost to a bad team is all I'm saying. Sometimes you got to tip your cap to the opponent whether you like it or not.
And let's also tip our cap to Greg Lovelady because, they lost those 3 games by a combined total of 4 runs, and those are basically like what I like to call coin flip games. They can go either way. Didn't work out, but yeah, I mean and there's still plenty of baseball, obviously left to be played here for UCF. As we head down the stretch.
And by the way, I think it's, if anybody's trying to judge Greg Lovelady or making decisions, I think it's foolish.
Just stop it right now. The guy is midway through his first season. Just stop it with that.
And
you know what I mean?
None of these are his players. They're none of his players. Now, I do think this, because of the success that Johnny Dawkins had in his first year, and the first year that Coach Aberson had at women's basketball, and even Scott Frost,
yeah.
I feel like now people just assume that, Greg Lovelady should do the same thing. And I actually think he has to some extent. I mean, the pitching staff's a top 10 coming into the weekend was, much better than it's been in the years. His bullpen's been much better than it's been in the last couple of years. But I feel like people just assume, he's going to turn it around like everybody else turns it around. And, that's not fair. In baseball, there's a lot more players. It's just a unique deal. I like Greg Lovelady. He's going to win here. And I think he's done a good job. His staff's done a good job. There are some flaws in this team. And by the way, Coach Lovelady has been the first to acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. He's acknowledged that in post games where some of his, their flaws have been exposed at times. And so I don't think he's hiding from that. I think, I would that would be the other thing I would say about people is to kind of keep that in mind. And look, there's still, if they could turn things around, they're in a position where they can make a regional. So that's my point. And then if you make it, anything can happen in college baseball. So I would just tell people, like, take a deep breath, exhale, and it's okay. It's okay.
UCF's got 3 this weekend at East Carolina. Actually, as we're recording this, they're in extra innings of the first game. And, oh, by the way, before we go, final, just in, UCF defeats East Carolina 8-7 in 11 innings. They come back from down, what was this, Eric Lopez, 7-1 in the fourth, and the Knights come back and beat East Carolina in their first of 3 in extra innings. So a big comeback win for Greg Lovelady's guys.
How about all you people about jumping ship, huh? How about them people? I told you. Well, that's a heck of a win, and maybe that's a turning point. I mean, they needed that win. East Carolina's got some bullpen issues this year, and that kind of reared his ugly head. But again, credit to the team. They didn't give up. They were down 7-1. They got some power, a couple of home runs to get back in the game and some big hits down the stretch there. So a big win for them to take the first game of that series and stop the bleeding a little bit. Rylan Thomas, I know you've been very high on him. Big
Love
2
me
RBI
some Rylan
hit.
Thomas. He's been good this year.
Well, he's been, been a bit of a slump lately, but he came out of it. Got a big hit there. And how about Bryce Tucker? Got out of a jam in the bottom of the ninth to send the game to extra innings. That's a heck of a comeback for them to pull off. Bozeman, how about Bozeman, who had missed all that time with an injury at short, with the go-ahead RBI in the 11th inning in a marathon game that went over 4 hours, I'm sure. But, man, to get back on that winning side of things after being trailing 7-1.
Yep.
And Kyle Marsh, Thomas with a home run in the game. Marsh, I've always been a fan of. He got him in within 7-3. Robbie Howe got knocked out in this game early.
But that bullpen, 4 guys, Thompson, Ward, Williams, and Tucker, really picked him up and finished off the game.
Which we mentioned earlier in this podcast. It's been way better than it's been in the last couple of years. So that's why I didn't really feel it was fair to compare this slide to the past years, because I think Lovelady's done a heck of a job with guys having roles in the bullpen and in the rotation. So a heck of a win for that team on the road at a tough place at ECU to pick up that first game. We'll see what happens the rest of the weekend, but that's a big to kind of stop that slide and then maybe can build on that.
Cool. Let's flip over to softball, Eric. You and I were at the first game of 3 in the War on I-4 series, UCF against USF, at the softball complex. 2-0 win for UCF in game 1 of that series. And this is coming off of a weekend where UCF won 2 out of 3 at Memphis, including putting up double figures in the rubber game of the series. So Aaliyah White was outstanding today. Pitched probably, I think you said it was her best game probably of the entire year against the USF team that, let's be honest with you, they have come upon hard times because, a number of people are not on the roster anymore that were earlier when they started the season. But Jasmine Esparza with an RBI hit, Linnea Goodman with an RBI hit that provided UCF some insurance, and Aaliyah, by the way, went the distance, 7 innings, 3 hits, no runs, walked 3, struck out 6. Outstanding performance by her. And UCF adds to their total in the War on I-4 series. UCF, as of our recording in this podcast, with a 38-18 lead over USF. Remember, each sport there's a total of 6 points up for grabs in each sport that both teams compete in. Now, how they determine who gets the points is depending upon, how many times each team plays. Softball in particular, they play only 3 times, so that's this weekend. And so there's 2 points at stake for every game. There's obviously all kinds of quirky things with, track and field and whatnot. But hey, so far, good start against USF. Aaliyah White, man, she has been the innings eater this year. And even though, don't let the record fool you, she's 15-11 on the season. But she seems to be getting a little bit better as the season goes on, Eric.
She is, and you mentioned this was, I think, the best performance I've seen her pitch in person at home.
She's had some good ones.
I did some good ones, but either, didn't get the result, or I think when you consider the fact it's a game that's nationally televised on ESPNU.
Yep.
And trust me, the players know. They downplay it, but they know. So, you can't avoid it. You see the cameras everywhere on the field. So they're aware. So you're on national television on ESPNU. You're facing your in-state rival, your big rival in the conference, your big rival in general, USF, as you mentioned, who, by the way, Aaliyah White from the Land O'Lakes area played high school ball in Tampa. So I think she's aware of that program. And I know from history, because she ain't the first UCF pitcher to come from Tampa area. They usually circle, I can tell you from past knowledge and history, they usually circle that game. And USF has been they're coming in playing very well. They got a good lineup, and she just really was consistent throughout. And one of the issues she's had this year at times, and then you see this with young pitchers, is the third time around in a batting order, so maybe she gets wear down a little bit. Maybe the other team makes something goes
everybody
wrong.
Though.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen in this game. She was fantastic. She got stronger, and watching her in person, I felt for the first time there was a little that not swaggers. I don't know if that's the right proper word, but that confidence that you like to see from the great pitchers have when they're really in control and in the circle. That kind of like I feel good here. I belong here. I'm confident there, and it takes a while. And I thought she just felt in command, and her changeup, is working. A couple of notes. She's the first UCF pitcher to beat USF in her first career start against USF since Allison Kime did it as a sophomore in 2006 in Tampa. She is the first UCF pitcher to shut out she's the second pitcher, to shut out USF in the history of the rivalry. Shelby Turnier did it last year in game 1 of that series in Tampa. She was a senior. So my point is, that's a pretty impressive feat to do in your first start against your in-state rival in a big conference series. This is a big conference series from a standing standpoint on national television. And she wasn't phased. And obviously we got a lot of softball to go this year. Who knows what's going to happen? But I think the exciting thing about it that I will take about that is, that going into next year and going into the future, you've got your number one. She is a number one caliber pitcher that can win big games. And I think she's showing that. And I think she's maturing and she's making progress. And I think that's the exciting thing with this young team. You're seeing some of the girls growing up before your very own eyes. And there's always that moment. And I think that was a big one for her. From a confidence standpoint. And she needed to be good because USF was very good too. It was actually a great pitching game. I was surprised because both teams this year have been up and down with their pitching. So I thought it would be more of a 6-4, 7-5 game. That's those have been the type of games. Going back to the UCF series at Memphis, that's what it was, a 10-6 game on that Sunday. And you're thinking, well, maybe they're going to get some of that, at least not for this game. And I thought defensively they were good behind her, and I thought she was good, and she got stronger as the game went on, which was a positive sign. So a lot of positives, credit to her. And I thought it was credit to UCF for jumping out early with a 1 run in the first, and they added an insurance run, which I thought was pivotal in that 6th inning to make it 2-0. And they still left a lot of runners on base, which is a concern. That's been a bugaboo. But it's a big win. It's a rivalry game. Look, it is what it is. It's always exciting to get those type of wins, but a good step for her on that, and good for this program for the exposure. ESPNU, they were there last year, and it's funny, Jeff. I can tell you this because I just finished watching the DVR because I DVR'd the game, and one of the advantages is UCF earlier this year went to Mary Nutter up in Palm Springs.
Yep.
That's the tournament that ESPN, a lot of their will go to those 2 weeks. They have a 2-week tournament in Mary Nutter, 2 separate weekends. ESPN goes there and interviews all the marquee teams because all the marquee teams play in Mary Nutter. So they interview all the teams there and they do their action photos. So if you watch an ESPN broadcast, for example, of a softball game, you'll see like these action shots from players and coaches, right? They'll say, well, coming up in the 4th inning, Tim Walton will join us. And they'll show a photo of Tim Walton with a, serious facial or whatever. And the same thing with a player coming up to the plate. So. And it was cool to see that they did that in the UCF USF telecast. Like coming up, they mentioned Pam Ward, who did the game with Sherry Kemp, mentioned coming up. We'll talk to head coach Renee Lors Gillespie, and there's an action shot of Coach Gillespie right there at the UCF logo. And to me, it's just I know it's a dorky thing coming out of me, but it's just so cool to see that. I have no idea how much that means it shows that you're a big time program. You know, that's another example of how much this program has grown, that ESPN is using action shots of you and other players like Courtney Rowe. And they did the same thing last year when they played at USF. And so that's kind of the fun thing about it, is that when you play in these things that people notice. And I think that's always a big plus. And I guarantee you, and I know this, I mean, recruits are watching that game. So they now know more about UCF, and kids that are already verbally committed are going to be excited, even more excited and stuff like that. And I think that's the message, is you go to UCF, you could play in big games. You're going to be showcased. You know, you don't have to go to an SEC school or Pac-12 to get noticed. You can come to a UCF and get noticed. So I think there's a lot of big takeaways from this game, not only on the field but off the field, because of the game being nationally televised.
So we got 2 more games left in this series. So
by the way,
yeah. And you know, and you're right. I mean, it was good that you know, you get the national TV exposure. Wish they could see the whole series, but 2 more games in the series still. Remember, 2 points at stake in each game for the War on I-4 trophy. Right. 5:30. We're recording this Thursday night. 5:30 Friday, April 14th is game number 2, and then Saturday 1 p.m. is the final game. And then the schedule looks like this the rest of the way. Next Wednesday, the Knights are at Florida in Gainesville. Home for UConn for 3, and that's going to wrap up the home schedule for UCF softball. Not next weekend, but the following weekend. So April 28th, 29th, and 30th. Home for a 3-game set against UConn, and then it's 4 games on the road, and then it's tournament time, because they got that last game, the first of that final 4-game stretch is going to be in Daytona against Bethune-Cookman on Wednesday, May the 3rd. So that game is going to be that game is basically their last game in the state of Florida until conference tournament time. They finish up the season early May against Tulsa, and then it's American Athletic Conference time. So the schedule's getting hot right now, Eric Lopez.
No question. And by the way, that first game of that Tulsa series will be on the American Digital Network. So,
yes.
You know, that'll be showcased there. You can watch that. And, of course, the tournament's in Greenville. So a lot of time, you know, you hope that maybe the team – and we haven't even discussed it. Maybe the play of the year in UCF athletics, maybe, and certainly one of the plays of the year in college softball happened with UCF, the turning point on Sunday in the win against Memphis. Everybody's seen it on social media.
That's right.
I
can't believe I haven't mentioned this, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's why I'm here. The first ever in program history triple play.
Now, I'm amazed by that, by the way. That is the first ever triple play in program history.
Yep. Yeah, and it's one of the most amazing things when for people that didn't follow the game, it was a wild game. UCF and Memphis was back. You know, UCF led 10-3 at one point. Memphis made a run and made it 10-6. And, you know, Demara Beijing, the freshman out of Canada, was, you know, in relief in the 7th, and Memphis got the first 2 on. And then they had to bring back Aaliyah White in the ball game. And I think she left a walk in the other hitter, or it wasn't a single. I don't recall. So nonetheless, it's the bases loaded and nobody out in the bottom of the 7th at a 10-6 game. And I'm thinking, I'll be honest, I'm thinking to myself, oh boy. Oh boy, this you know,
here we go.
This thing, oh my god, oh boy. And I'm following this on the tracker. Okay, I'm following this on the tracker. And the next thing, you know, and I'm holding my breath. I'm like, oh God, no. Because, you know, let's be honest, this team's had some rough innings this year. So you're very concerned. And the next thing I see is the tracker goes,
the game's over.
three outs in play. And I'm like, how is that humanly possible? That couldn't have happened. What are you talking? And I thought the person screwed up. Oh, it must have been a glare. It's a glitch. And then I went to UCF_softball, and they confirmed it. A triple play.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how is that humanly possible?
Made number 8 on the SportsCenter top 10 that night.
Yeah, it should have been higher. And it was like number 3 on the ESPNW top 10 list. That's for right. All the women athletics. And what it was, and it was Memphis' like best hitter, I think. Lindsey Crowdis was at the plate. She had a fly ball to shallow center. Megan Greenwell makes the catch, throws it to home plate. Perfect throw. Cassidy Brewer, the catcher, tags the runner at third at home plate for the second out of the inning. Then she throws a bullet to third base. Courtney Roden makes the tag. The runner that was going from second to third gets tagged out. Game ends on a triple play.
Yeah.
That's how they won the series and won that game. And maybe could be the turning point, you know, when you look back, depending on how this team does the rest of the year, because just, you know, in talking to people, I've never, it was like the most exciting moment. And you know this from players. I mean, they were certainly fired up. I mean, that was probably one of the best flights that a lot of those players and coaches have had in a long time ever. When you consider you win it on a triple play, what a rush that is. And then to find out you made top 10 Sports Center is incredible. And I think they're a little more confident. That's a huge boost, a credit to their defense, a credit to the staff for working on that. That doesn't happen by accident. There's communication going on, and they work on that in practice in the fall and the spring, and it paid off. And what a way to win a series. A very good, scrappy Memphis team to win 2 out of 3 on the road. And now you start this USF series, and who knows what that could lead to.
We'll link to that play, by the way, in the show notes. And I was surprised to see, there were some UCF fans, apparently, at Memphis who were celebrating the end of that game on the video. It was pretty amazing.
It was a great image. A lot. I mean, the fans. I mean, UCF softball fans travel across the board. A lot of families from areas. I mean, they make it weekends out of it, just like a lot of football fans do. I mean, I've always compared this, Jeff. When it comes to women's sports, I've compared softball to football, in that a lot of the softball fans playing around that weekend, they make trips and they pick which trips to go to. They're very passionate, maybe irrational. Trust me, you have no idea. If you only knew the direct messages I get from fans after a loss, what's going on? I'm not used to this. And look, the way I take it is I think it's a compliment to the program. The fact that when a team loses, have won so much like they have in the last handful of years. I mean, really the entire 12, how many years, the 16 years in the program, but more specifically in the last handful of years, the way they've won, I think people get spoiled. So the fact that people are now to the point where they're concerned and they're like, why is this not working? Why are they struggling, this or that? Is great, because I know I've done this for 10 years. And I remember, there'd be times that nobody even noticed we were playing. So now not only are people noticing we're playing, but they're questioning why we're not winning every game, or why are we not pitching very well, especially with the tradition we have in pitching that's always a question that I get asked about, when somebody doesn't pitch well. But that's okay.
As though you know all the answers.
Absolutely. I am the answer. I am the ear. I have all the answers for everybody. And I can solve everybody's mysteries, I guess. It's funny you mentioned that, because everybody assumes that. Fans, I mean, it's always interesting. But no, it's great. And I don't discourage it. I don't want to make it sound like I welcome it. I'm all for talking softball and communicating, and even if you're frustrated, I get it, and that's great. I want the excitement and people being passionate about the team, and I think that's all positives. And hopefully, like I said, it's been an interesting up and down year, but it's a young group, as I've told people in messages.
Listen, you're a team player.
Well, it is. It's true. I mean, you gotta, you try to take it with a grain of salt, and you have to understand what's going on. But that was an amazing play, and to me, Jeff, I know the year's not over yet, but I can't think of a UCF play in any sport that's happened this year that would top that play. Can you?
That Adrian Killens run back against East Carolina when he went basically 110 yards in 3 seconds, that's about as close as I can come up with.
Sure. That's a good one.
I'm coming in with that one. What are you coming in with?
You're going to put that one number one, or are you putting that I'm putting the triple play number one.
Okay.
That doesn't happen. I mean, Adrian Kelly,
fair point.
Hopefully that happens more often. Hopefully.
Right.
He's capable of that. I've never seen a triple play, to your point, in person in any sport. So that's pretty remarkable. And to make top 10 Sports Center is pretty impressive.
That's true too.
And to me, I'll go. In fact, I'll go a step further on this. I think to softball, that's kind of like the Brashad Perriman Hail Mary in Greenville. Now, I still think the Perriman one's bigger. It's more memorable because it won a conference title.
I was going to say, Sam McCloskey might have something to say about that.
Correct. Well, but what I'm saying is, it's just the most craziest, remarkable, play. It's one thing to win it a championship, but to win it in a Hail Mary, what are the odds? Right? That was a crazy play. And to win a game on a game-ending triple play is crazy. Obviously, yes, the McCloskey home run against Tulsa to win the championship, the most memorable moment or memorable hit. But we've seen walk-off home runs. We've seen walk-off hits. I'm talking about the abnormal, crazy play. I'm not talking about the most important play. I'm talking about the wackiest, where you still, you think about it, you're like, how the heck did that happen type of moment. You know what I mean? So that's what I meant more by that. The Perriman one. Because I'm serious. Every time I see the Perriman play, I still kind of like, I can't believe that happened. Right. And we've going on 3 years on that. Yeah. And I feel like I'm going to be the same way 3 years from now. Every time I see that triple play, I'm like, how the heck did that happen?
Well, I'm glad it got on SportsCenter Top 10. That was actually pretty cool. And a good job by Nate and the social media staff also by getting that up there as well and getting ESPN's attention on it. In particular, I think that was really a big win.
And a credit to Memphis, because that was a Memphis video broadcast, as you know, working in video. So obviously Nate, I'm guessing, I haven't talked to him about it, but obviously in that situation, you got to go through the video department for approval. So I think credit to Memphis for allowing that to be shown, even though it was a play at their team's expense. You know what I mean? Because as you know, I mean, I don't know how many other video schools maybe don't do that because it went against them, but they allowed it, and so credit to all parties to make that work, and as a result get an ESPN top 10. I don't know if Memphis really appreciates it, but good class sportsmanship and class on both sides.
Class folk over at Memphis. All right, hey, real quick before we wrap up, update on golf. Women's golf is going to be in the American Athletic Conference Championships. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday in Palm Coast. So be on the lookout for that. Men's golf is at the Boilermaker Invitational this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, West Lafayette, Indiana, before they head to their American Athletic Conference Championship down in Palm Harbor. Tennis. I'm going to start with the women. Ladies first. They've got a Saturday match at the USTA National Campus against USF. Which is their final regular season match before the American Championships, which are coming this Wednesday on April the 19th at Lake Nona. And that brings us to men's tennis, which has finished the regular season with 2 wins against East Tennessee State and UNC Wilmington in Johnson City, Tennessee. And they actually, a week from the day that we're recording this, Thursday, April the 20th, they will start their run in the American Championships, and they come in at ranked number 30 in the ITA Oracle College Tennis Rankings, just ahead of Minnesota and Ole Miss and Florida State, and just behind the likes of Wisconsin, Illinois, Tulane, and USF. USF's at 26. John Roddick's folks these guys just keep climbing the rankings. And let's see what Corey Lovett and Danny Kurzman are in the latest double rankings at number 79 in the country. Lovett is number 47 in the singles, which is pretty impressive in and of itself. So hey, number 30 in the number 30 going into the conference tournament, Eric. That's a good place to be if you're John Roddick's guys, isn't it?
Absolutely. The American Conference Tennis Tournament, which, by the way, will be at Lake Nona at the USTA Center. Mm-hmm. Very significant. You could speak better to this because you've covered the tennis program a lot more frequent than I did back when you were working at UCF, and a lot longer. Even back when you were a student, I believe you did some tennis matches, I think, back in the old what was it, UCF TV days? Some coverage. And also
I never did tennis. I never did tennis on UCF TV, but when I was there at the video department, boy, I shot myself a lot of tennis on video. And
there you go.
And so yeah, but we had some good teams. We haven't had teams that have been this good and are getting better, and that's the thing.
And the amazing thing, he's done this in his first year. And I know that, and this is not gonna. Some people are gonna snicker at this comment. And because, it's men's college tennis and all this. John Roddick might be the best coach on campus, period, in any sport that they have right now. What he's done already at UCF. Like I told you I interviewed him in the fall, and I told you that I think he's going to lead UCF to the promised land. I didn't think he would lead him to the NCAA tournament possibly this year. I thought it would take him a year. And he told me in the interview in the fall that he actually liked the team he had, that he got some transfers and things like that. If he can get UCF to the NCAA tournament in year one, think about what he could do in the years to come with that USTA center. I said it in the fall, and I think I'm going to say it again. I think John Roddick eventually, by the time his run at UCF's over, is going to lead that tennis program not only to the NCAA tournament on a frequent basis, but I think he's going to lead them to a national championship.
Boy.
I think he's that good. I think he's remarkable.
Well,
and I think what he's
oh man, that would be something.
I mean, I'm blown away by what he's done. I'm blown away. I don't remember tennis being this relevant, and what he's done is amazing. And again, I did it in the fall, and I'm going to do it again. And the next time I see Danny White, I'm going to tell him a heck of a job with that tennis program. A heck of a job. Making the hire, making the commitment. Man, I'm just blown away. If he can pull this off, and who knows? You know, obviously, you got the conference tournament to go. We'll see how they do that. We'll probably get into that more next week. But unbelievable. I'm just blown away by it. And you could speak better to it because you've been around it a lot longer, obviously more frequent than I have. But just from afar, I'm just in awe. I mean, they're ahead of Florida State in the rankings in tennis. I don't know if people are aware of that. You know, and I've talked to some sources that follow this stuff more closely than I do. You know, the way it's going, you know, if they can maintain that 30 ranking and, you know, probably make a nice run in the conference tournament, which they're capable of, they'll probably go to an NCAAs, maybe go to Florida. If Florida hosts, Florida's like a 16th seed. Mm-hmm. If, you know, right now ranking, I should
right
say.
Now they're ranked 16th. Florida is.
They could be in play for Florida. They could be in play for a program that you know very well, Georgia.
Yep, Georgia's 11th right now.
That would be some storyline. So it's just kind of wild. I believe the selection show is May 9th, from what I was told. But for him to pull this off is remarkable, and everything that we heard is true. I mean, this was a guy that led Oklahoma to the national championship runner-up the last couple of years. I mean, he is one of the top coaches in that sport. And, boy, an immediate impact at UCF. And I think you have to believe, Jeff, that the coaches in this state, the college coaches in this state, they won't mention it publicly, they have to be very concerned about what
sweating. They are sweating bullets right now with what John Roddick has done. And one of them I think that is certainly sweating bullets is the guys over at USF who've been quite good.
And they got a good program as well.
Very good program, but they're the top team from the American in the ITA rankings at 26. Tulane is right behind them at 27. Right. UCF did beat USF. And UCF right now is at 30. Memphis is at 34. SMU is at 36. So that gives you an idea of the kind of the competition that's taking place in the American right now as the Knights get ready to head to the conference championship, which will be on their home turf at the USTA National Tennis Center down by Lake Nona. All right, let's wrap this thing up, Lopez. What do you got working on this week? Other than, of course, UCF softball, which we will both be at on Friday, and then you will be there at Saturday, right?
I will call the games back on the air Friday and Saturday. Friday 5:30 on UCF Nights TV. Saturday at 1 o'clock Eastern. And then, actually, it's funny. I got softball next weekend, but in Tampa, I'll be on the American Digital Network, Memphis, and USF. So I'll be seeing a lot of USF softball in the next week. It's just kind of weird how that works out. But, doing a lot of softball in between now and then. That's really kind of what's going to occupy things. And, just try to kind of see where that season goes. You can follow me on Eric Lopez Elo for all the latest developments. And one of the things I will also have on the podcast next weekend, as well as on the site, and I'll post it on Twitter as well, as the television numbers for that softball game, and see how it did compared to last year's game. Yeah, I mean, it did very well. It did very strong. Now, last year was a Sunday game, so it did big numbers. This being a Thursday game, it probably won't be as big because it's a Thursday, but nonetheless, should be interesting to see how they do on the ESPN network there. And certainly I know they were big numbers in Orlando last year, and I would expect that to be the case again, I would assume, on Thursday. So cool. Look for that in the next week.
All right, Elo, and I'll be, of course, at UCF and USF on Friday as well. And keeping an eye on things at UCF_Banneret. You can follow Eric, of course, at Eric Lopez Elo, myself at Jeff_Sharon. Don't forget to check out Brian Murphy, who's got a baseball column up right now on blackandgoldbanneret.com. You can hit us up there, as well as on our Facebook. Just search for Black and Gold Banneret and listen to this podcast. Subscribe via iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, and TuneIn Radio. All right, Lopez, thanks again, brother.
No problem, buddy.
And thanks to you for listening. This has been the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.